A couple weeks ago I did a video on a Ferrari, and in that video I mentioned my love of that car stemmed from its resemblance to, at least in my 10-year-old mind, the Stratos Zero I had seen in the Michael Jackson Moonwalker video. Of course I didn't know it at the time that it was a Stratos Zero and thought the car was just made for the scene in the movie. It was only much later with my introduction to the internet that I was surprised to find out that the car was real. It was designed by Marcello Gandini of Bertone to get its foot in the door with Lancia. At the time, there was sort of a silent competition going on to see who could create the shortest car. Needless to say, the Stratos won this competition hands down. In fact, legend has it that when the car was completed, Bertone himself drove it straight down to Lancia and didn't even stop for the security barrier, and instead drove right under it to the surprise of the guard on duty. The car did exactly what it was supposed to do, and Lancia used Bertone to design the Lancia Stratos. And with that, I will quit trying to pronounce Italian words. For a lot of us, the Moonwalker movie was our introduction to this car. For whatever reason, Mattel didn't make this car, which was always a surprise to me given their love of futuristic cars. They did make the Stratos, as recently as this year, but not the Stratos Zero, at least not yet. In fact, most die-cast manufacturers have skipped this car, along with most model manufacturers. The only die-cast model I've ever been able to find was made by Palitoy out of the UK. But as of this video, I haven't seen one on sale for years. I purchased this model and another one you'll see later about 10 years ago, and they are some of the most rare die-cast cars I own. There are some 1/18 scale models floating around, but they're very rare and very expensive. As you can see, this model's in rather poor shape. It's missing the louvered engine covering in the back, all of its stickers, the windshield. The paint is practically gone. The axles are bent, and it feels like it's been buried in sand for a few years. In fact, I remember buying this car and the guy that shipped it sent it with quite a bit of sand still in the car, almost as if he dug it up and dropped it on eBay after finding out it was worth something. Anyway, it needs a lot of work, and I'm going to need to reproduce the missing parts so that I end up with a complete model in the end. The first thing I'll do is remove the paint with some aircraft paint stripper. This is an important step for this car as I need to see how much damage is done to the underlying metal. Die-cast can, over time, especially underground, become sort of brittle and heavily pitted. It's not the end of the world, but it makes working on the car difficult. However, this car's damage is just superficial. The metal just under the paint and oxidation seems to be fine, so I'll go ahead and start doing some sanding with some 250 grit sandpaper. So obviously this is a toy, and as is common with toys, the manufacturers tend to spend time making sure the toy doesn't have any sharp edges, in case someone could step on it or say a child rams the car into your foot, etc. So in a way, they sacrifice accuracy for safety. Here I'll try to retrieve as much accuracy as I can by sharpening the corners and edges, along with thinning out some areas and removing casting marks and mold lines. Though to be honest, this car doesn't have very many of those. While not shown here, this is by far the longest step in this build. Here you can see the results of all that sanding, which I was very happy with, and can now move on to other items like the interior plastic and engine. Both need a good wash in some soapy water, and then I can get a good look at both of them. To my surprise, both seem to be in great shape, so I'll set these aside for later. So as I said earlier, I do happen to have another one of these cars that is in much better shape, and most importantly, it's complete. The key parts that I need are the louvered hatch and the windshield. From these parts I can make reproductions that will go into my project car, starting with the louvered hatch. So not to go too deep down a failed path, I originally had planned to cast this part in aluminum. The part was not complex, and since I only need one good one, then a sand mold would be perfect. Now I've cast many items much more complex than this one, but due to the somewhat recent cold weather we had in Texas, I couldn't easily find propane bottles for my torch, so I decided to use MAP gas instead. Well, I guess this was a big no-no because the gas would cause the aluminum to thicken up and form a crust on the surface. Needless to say, I could never get the aluminum to flow through the mold and ended up giving up on this method. With the metal casting a failure, I decided to do what I should have done in the beginning and make a silicone mold. Now, I've covered making molds on my channel several times and in dedicated videos, so I'm not going to go through a huge amount of depth here. The main difference in this video is that I'll be making a one-part mold instead of a two-part mold. The reason for this has to do with the fact that the part is rather thin, and a 1-part mold tends to be more accurate than a 2-part mold. You can always just suspend the part in the mold and then cut your way to it, but what I like to do is glue in styrene sections so I don't have to cut all that much. I also like to use the end of a pipette to make an injection port with a small resin reservoir. This comes in handy later when I use a vacuum chamber to remove the bubbles. I use popsicle sticks and hot glue to suspend the part in the mold. To help get the part out of the mold, I'm using a very flexible silicone. I'll leave a link to it below, but you just mix part A and B by volume and then degas the mixture in a vacuum chamber. Once all the gas is removed, I pour the silicone into a mold and then degas it just in case any air might have gotten trapped around the part. For the windshield, I'll be doing the exact same thing, the only difference is the container I'm using to make the mold. Once these molds have cured for 24 hours, I can pull the original parts out, and once they're out, the mold is ready to start making resin parts. To make the parts, I mix up the correct resin for the part and use a pipette to inject that into the mold. I then degas the mold in the chamber and let the part sit for a few hours to fully cure. For the clear resin I use for the windshield, I'll let that sit for 3 days. Again, I'll leave links below to my videos that go into all the details of casting resin parts if this is something you want to try. So while I was happy with the louvered hatch in the back, I was not nearly as happy with the windshield. Here you can see the original windshield, and in a bit I'll install the reproduction windshield I made. The issue is the fit of the original windshield. It's just not that great, with gaps and other issues that would need to be worked out. These issues were reproduced in the copy, and then other issues were added in due to the resin I was using. Specifically, the resin was way too soft, even after 2 weeks of curing. With the windshield not working out, I decided to go down another path and try and scratch build one. For that I would need some rigid plastic, and the cheapest form of rigid plastic I know of is the plastic they use in CDs. So I turned the body over and traced out the outline of the windshield onto the label side of a CDRW, and then roughly cut that shape out on a bandsaw. To clean up the cuts and dial everything in, I used a diamond grinder. These use water to keep the glass, or in this case plastic, cool. Not going to lie, I made about 4 of these before I got the process down. A lot of hand sanding and fitting, but eventually I got it to fit without gaps, and was even able to remove the foil from the CD without any effort. The coatings on the disc gives it a really cool effect when you look at it just right, and I thought I would keep that. But if you want to remove it, you need only polish it off. Since the project seemed to be going pretty well, I decided to go ahead and prime the body. This lets me see any imperfections on the metal surface. It also allows me to see the car in a more complete state than it's really in. From this state, I usually decide on things like wheels. And yeah, let's talk about wheels. I have 3D printed so many wheels. I started by using others' designs, but then decided on heavily modifying a trailer hub and an RC tire to work together. I like my hubs and tires to be painted separately so I can paint the hub without affecting the tire, and I also like the wheels to be able to go on after the hubs have been installed on the axles, and only go to a preset distance so each wheel is exactly the same. It took a few tries to get that to work and also to get the size correct. But let's talk about wheel size. The original tires seem wrong to me. They seem way too small for the wheel wells that they are installed in. For one thing, they're all the exact same wheels on the front and the back, and I believe the back tires are supposed to be fatter than the front. So I happen to be the type of person that likes to make the wheels fit the wheel wells of the car I'm working on, even if that means it's going slightly out of scale or the car might sit ever so slightly higher than it should. I mitigated that to some degree on this car by using a thinner wire axle. Anyway, the point here is that the wheels are slightly bigger than the original, so you can't see through the gap between the wheel wells and the tire. Once I have the size I want printed out, I'll go ahead and paint them with black acrylic. For the hubs, I paint them with liquid chrome. After that, I will set them aside to dry. Since I had the liquid chrome out, I also decided to chrome the engine. Before I did this, however, I took the Dremel with a spur bit and removed some of the plastic on the exhaust ends, as the original casting had these covered up. This just adds a little bit of realism. After that, I chromed the engine using my airbrush. The trick to this chrome process is to make sure you let it dry for as long as possible before you touch it. 2 weeks is about the right time if you can put it off that long. So this next part is something I've yet to do a dedicated video on. I can remedy that later and give you the quick and dirty tutorial here. But what I need to do is photo etch some parts. Photo etching is an art unto itself, but I tend to think of it as stickers on steroids, though you can build practically anything using the process. This car has 2 stickers on it, and I want to replace these with photo etched ones just to add to the realism. So let's go all Inception-like and do a tutorial within a tutorial. The first thing you'll need to do is obtain an image that you want to photo etch. This can be something you made or something you borrow from the internet. You'll need to convert the image to black and white, true black and white, not grayscale. Take note that the white areas are the areas that will be etched. You'll then need to mirror the image so that it looks right on the final part. Using a laser printer, you'll need to print the image on the shiny side of this special transfer paper, link below. You can also use the shiny side of label paper that has had the labels removed, but I find this doesn't work all that well for this particular process. Next, you'll need the metal you want to etch. Here I'm using 100,000 thick brass sheet. This can be cut with regular scissors. You will need to set the metal on a heat-proof surface and then wipe it down with acetone to remove any oils. Using a heat gun, you will need to heat the metal up. I tend to heat it to the point that it takes on a slight brown color. This tends to be hot enough for the transfer to take place. Once you reach this temperature, turn off the heat gun and then apply the transfer paper shiny side down, and then press as hard as you can all the way around the image, being careful not to burn yourself. In fact, I normally wear thick leather gloves when I apply the image because the metal is very hot, so just keep that in mind. After a few minutes, the metal will have cooled down, and if the stars have aligned and you paid your taxes on time, the transfer paper will peel off, leaving the image on the metal. Here you can see I got a decent transfer, but there are small specks in the black area where the toner was not applied. So I'll need to cover these areas with some enamel paint if I want to improve this part. Since this is just a demonstration, I'll skip the enamel and we will see how it looks. Next, I'll apply some clear tape to the back of the metal. This is here to keep the etchant from eating through the back of the part. I normally just fold the tape back and use it as a handle, but you can also trim it off if you like. Now that the part is done, I can drop it into the Ferric Chloride etchant, link below. I'll use a small stir stick to hold the part on its side as the part etches. While I'm not using any agitation here, the process goes much faster if you have a way to stir the solution. Most people use a small aquarium pump to get the solution moving, but it's not absolutely necessary. After about 10 minutes, I can pull the part out, wash it off, and see how much material has been removed. If I like it, then the part is done. If not, then I stick it back in the solution and let it etch some more. To remove the toner from the part, I use a paper towel with some acetone on it. To get it perfectly clean, you'll need to use acetone and a toothbrush in a small bowl. Now this is just a simple etch, and while useful, it really doesn't show the true power of this process, because by controlling the etching process, you can actually cut parts out, while also etching the surface. So as you can see here, I made a Toy Polloi logo keychain. I pulled the part out after a few minutes and then covered the words with enamel paint. Let that dry and then stuck the part back in the etchant. After a few more minutes, the etchant ate right through the metal and cut the part out. Because I made the parts out of brass, I can plate them in my zinc plating setup to get a silver metal look, as opposed to the brass. This process is the same that I use on my cars. I allow it to plate for a few minutes and then remove the part and polish with some steel wool. I can plate it some more if I feel it needs it. If the brush look is not your style, then you can always polish the zinc on top to a mirror shine if need be. Last, you can always fill in the etched areas with paint and wipe away the excess to color in the lettering or the design of whatever you're making. Now I've literally only spent about 5 minutes on this, not counting the time it's spent in the etchant and plating. You can always improve on it by spending more time getting the perfect transfer, cleaning up the transfer with enamel paint, some light sanding. Better preparation gives better results, but this is just a demonstration piece to whet your appetite to give this a try. So getting back to the car, I've already etched out the back grille and painted it silver. I'm now painting in all the etched areas with black acrylic just to be sure they're all uniform. After I'm done painting them in, I will go over the part with a paper towel to remove the excess. Later I'll go over the part with some triple-aught steel wool to give it a brushed look. Alright, next up I'll be working on the base. Here the easiest thing to do is just matte powder coat it. It's quick, it's simple, it's much more resilient than paint. So I'll drop this in my powder box and give it a light dusting and let it spend 20 minutes in the oven, and this is the result I get. I'm finding the matte colors are very easy to work with and going on super thin. I'm still working on my powder coating skills and setup, but this result is perfectly fine for me. Now that the base is painted, I can go ahead and glue in my hubs and axles. This is a simple process. I drop some super glue on the end of the axle and stick it in the hub, making sure that it goes on straight. Then set everything aside to let the glue cure. Once it is cured, then I can glue on my tires. Here I need to make sure that the tread patterns are all pointing the correct direction. Since the tires go on from the outside, then all I need to do is apply glue to the hub to ensure that no glue squeezes out between the hub and tire, destroying my chrome paint. Well, we're 15 minutes in and I'm finally painting the car. I wanted a silver look, but not a normal silver because I want the other silver parts to pop. So instead I'm going to go with a gunmetal silver look with a matte finish. For this look, I'll be using Vallejo's Gunmetal Metal color. I really love this color and have painted a bunch of cars in it. It has some depth to it that is missing from a straight silver look. After the paint dries, I'll go over it with some Testor's matte clear coat. You can always go with a gloss, but in my opinion, metal cars look best in matte, especially if you have chrome parts you want to emphasize. For the louvered hatch in the back, I'll be painting that a straight silver, and then clear coating it with a matte clear coat. Once the paint on the hatch dries, then I can install it in the car. Normally the car manufacturer uses the internal plastic as part of the hinge for the doors and windows and such. However, this car doesn't do that and instead uses a small piece of metal that is riveted in to hold the louvered hatch. The metal has long since perished on this car, so I had to fashion a piece out of brass to replace it. I thought about trying to drill out the rivet and find a small screw to hold it, but in the end I decided to just glue it in with super glue. The brass is soft and bendable and should be able to hold the hatch open without breaking the glue. If I was going to give this to a child, I would definitely come up with something else, but since it's only going to ever be displayed, this should work fine. After the glue set up for the hatch, I went ahead and glued on the photo etch parts. And with all that done, all I had to do now was put the car back together. Man, this one was a lot of work, or I should say a lot of rework. A day wasted with the metal casting, more time wasted on the windshield, dozens of sets of wheels. But at the end of the day, I'm very happy with the result. I need some practice with scratch building CD windshields, and we'll probably revisit that in a future video if people want to see it. Right now the windshield is just tack glued in and can easily be removed. Just looking at the car in my hand, it looks great, but when I view it on my 30-inch screen in high def, I definitely see some scratches and issues that need to be addressed. Very pleased with the etch parts. They really tie everything together. You'll definitely be seeing me use more etch parts in the future. As for the wheels, again, looking at it from any distance, they look great, but when I look at them blown up a few dozen times, they may be a bit too big. Here's a height comparison with the unaltered car. I'll let you be the judge. Again, super easy to fix. In fact, I've already printed smaller wheels and tested them out before gluing these on. I just like these a little bit better. All in all, this was a fun project and a great learning experience for me. But as always, I like getting others' opinions and thoughts and the way that they would go about doing a restoration on a car like this. So feel free to let me know below. And with that, I'll quit babbling and catch you guys next time.